Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on a CEO's guide to your startup journey. The startups in the country are growing at an unprecedented speed, with digital transformation of enterprises giving them the push and consistent funding coming in. The startups are on to the next phase of growth. But thriving in it requires a strong strategy to account for scale, consistency, and quality. And who better to guide on it than a CEO? So I take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Vikas Bhonsle, who's CEO of Crayon Software Experts. Hi, Vikas. Nice to have you
Hello.
on.
Same here, Vaishnavi. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yes. Over the course of 5 episodes, Vikas will help us build a comprehensive video guide to help you understand a range of subjects, including infrastructure, understanding customer base, planning, resource allocation, hiring, reskilling, etc. The whole works. Vikas will add tips and time-tested tactics to navigate through difficult decisions for a startup in its growth phase. With clear do's and don'ts to follow, this guide will come in handy while strategizing on the trinity of people, processes, and technology. So without further ado, let's jump into the discussion with Vikas. Vikas, could you suggest some of the best budgeting tips and things to look out for when you start your startup journey?
Yeah, it's a very important question and a very extensive one at that. And I can draw upon my experience when I started Crayon. So when a founder really starts a company, he has a lot of things on his head. Where I'm going to put my money? Is it on the infrastructure? Is it on the offices? My fixed cost, my variable cost? And there are a lot of decisions that he needs to make. My experience tells me that it is always better to be a little conservative in the early days of your startup. Fiscal prudence needs to be exercised. And I think if you really need to spend, you need to spend a lot more on a couple of things. One is on acquiring the right kind of talent, and two, on customer acquisition cost. In the very early year of my startup, every time people used to ask me what's the strategy, and I have to say, just turn up in front of a customer, win the customer. So it's very important that you focus all the energies in acquiring the right set of customers. That said, it's also important as you start to look at your solution and a product to say, how much time do I need to have maturity in my product and my solution? And typically you need to allow about 18 to 20 months for your product to have a viable product in the marketplace. And then look at a 4 to 5 year window to really have a very stable business, a sustainable business. I think these are very important things. Patience is a virtue which is dying. And I think my first big advice is to be patient, build the business for sustainability rather than valuation, because it is extremely critical. When you start looking at the technology stack per se, I think it's a no-brainer to say that you don't look at building an on-prem infrastructure, because everything that you want today is available on the cloud in an OpEx pay-as-you-go model. So really, you don't have to have all the upfront cost of buying the infrastructure, investing in people to manage it, looking at security and all of those things, because that's now completely managed by the cloud provider. So these things are very clear. Also, package software. In the good old days, we used to go and buy package software for everything, but now everything is available in a SaaS model. Your HRMS software, your customer experience software, your accounting software, everything is available on a pay-as-you-go model. So really, you don't need to really spend, and try and see how you can, amortize the expenses over a larger period of time, so to say. So that becomes important. Third, I think a very big tip is, I was just going through some of the schemes that are driven by the government. There are more than 30 schemes. Of course, some of them have more validity and more relevance than the others. The startup fund, the seed startup fund, the Aspire program, the Chingari program. There is so much of funding available outside of the traditional ways of funding that people are having. I think we need to be smart to see how we can qualify for one of those schemes and take all the benefits that are there in terms of funding, in terms of patent protection, in terms of SOPs, tax incentives, so on and so forth. It's also important to know that a lot of the hyperscaler or the cloud service providers run programs. For example, Microsoft runs what you call the Microsoft Startup Founders Hub. AWS runs something called as the AWS Active program. Now, these are programs specifically meant for startups, which help you not only in the funding, but in developing your product and solution, going to market, co-selling, putting them on the marketplace, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of these things available. The final tip on budgeting, I think it's important that you have a living document. You look at what's the revenue that I want to drive, what is the investment that I need to make in people, facilities, administrative costs, so on and so forth. And as a result, what's the net profitability I'm arriving at? And then if you need to adjust basis, if you're falling short, whether you need to go higher on revenue or lower on expenses, and you create a living document and a goal to live by, I think that's very important. So I would surely advise everyone to have a proper budget in place, and that could be on a piece of paper, it could be on an Excel sheet, or it can be in more sophisticated packages. But I think that's the important step.
Having said that, now that's a tall order, but how can startups begin to take stock of their requirements and resources?
Yeah, Vaishnavi, resourcing is a very, very tough paradigm today. We are all living in the great resignation. Getting skilled people, keeping them on board, training them, developing them is a very difficult thing. And one of the things I missed talking about in the earlier thing, and you spoke about patience as a virtue. I think when you have patience as a virtue, and you're looking at a long cycle of 3 to 5 years to build strength in the business, inadvertently you build a culture. You build a culture in the organization which focuses on empowerment, which focuses on experimentation where you can fail fast. It focuses on a culture of training. I would advise founders to focus a lot on building the culture. Very pertinent to resources, it is important to build a culture of training and development, because that's where we are moving, right? It's moving from extensively being now focused on skills rather than experience. So it's a very new world that we are moving into. And I think in that world, it is important that we focus on the learning and the development part. Having said that, and having now gone through several cycles where people come in, people go, I think one of the things which is very important is to build a solid core. For anyone who has a startup, depending on what kind of startup, you need to have a super solid core that stays the duration, that stays the length of the startup, because others will come and go. It's inevitable. How much ever we try to do, there will be, there will be attrition, there will be churn. But if your core, the strong core, which I said, you must focus on bringing in the right kind of talent. If you focus on the core and that core stays the duration, then you have a very high chance of success. Now you come to really what do we look at in terms of requirement, right? Now it really depends on what's the kind of startup you have. The tech startup, is it a non-tech startup? What's your delivery model? Is it offline or is it online? Because an online delivery model typically will be more tech intensive. What are the expansion plans? Are you really wanting to go global? Is your scale very high? Then it perhaps serves that you serve your solution in a SaaS model versus having it in an infrastructure as a service model. You need to have very strong internal tech teams to make sure that rapid changes are made to the infrastructure and to the code. These things become important. It's also very important to know that eventually, as you move your solution to the cloud, which kind of cloud provider you're going to host with. Because depending on how you develop your product, your app, or your solution, certain clouds are more suitable for that kind of product and solution than the other cloud. It could be multi-cloud, it could be hybrid cloud. You need to work with the right technology provider to be able to guide you in this journey.
Thank you, Vikas, for enlightening us with time-tested methods for budgeting and providing a handy checklist for things needed at the very beginning for a startup. It was a pleasure having this conversation. Thank you.